Need a motion for approval of agenda?
I'll make a motion to approve. Second.
We have a motion by Mayor Pro Tem Gibbons, seconded by Councilmember Lopez to approve. Roll call.
Councilmember Alvarado,
Yes.
Givens,
Yes.
Lopez.
Yes.
Espinoza,
Yes.
and Prout.
Yes. Public comment. Anyone in the audience care to address the council? Did we receive anything?
No public comment.
Very good. We'll move on to management reports and we'll start 2021 preliminary strategic planning workshop session number 1.
So the American Council, this afternoon, the executive team and I will make a presentation to you, what we are calling a preliminary strategic plan workshop. And the agenda for this afternoon. Yeah. So the agenda for this afternoon, American Council is one, we'll go over the prior workshop format outline of how the city had done it. Based on some research we did with city clerk, we looked at the 2017, 18, and 19 workshops that the city council had with the previous city manager and some of the key staff. We'll do a quick overview of the Shaft Division 2011 report that was prepared back in 2010 and 11. Briefly overview of what a strategic plan format and its components entail. We'll introduce the SWAT analysis that the executive team and I prepared on strengths, limitations, opportunities, and threats, both internal and external within the organization. We'll look at overview of the current trends, both internally and externally, and then provide a list of policy objectives that each department director went through, looking at their departments in terms of legislation, whether it's regulatory or otherwise, that they foresee or are currently dealing with or anticipate will be dealing with. This is all to help engage in discussion, just so you have an idea of what we're dealing with. And then the final steps at the end of the workshop is to schedule a date for the workshop that will be more involved, more council involved in terms of preparing strategic priorities as well as goals for the organization. This is a very interactive process. As you see, we have all the department directors here with us that will all have a part in participating in each of the policy objectives. So the whole purpose of today is to have council interaction with us, to ask as many questions as you want on the different matters, to give you background, give you information. And so that's why they're all here. The desired outcomes from today is one, this is an informational report, as I said, to provide background to you in preparation for the future strategic plan workshop that we will propose to have. As stated, is to engage in a question and answer with you and the executive staff regarding policy objectives. It's also to provide you with time to take in all this information. You will see that it's quite a bit of information of what the department directors have come up with. And it's also to generate any follow-up inquiries you may have on any particular item that we may not have the response for today, or just after tonight, you might have more questions from what you hear. And so we ask that you please feel free to follow up with us to get additional information on that. And then, as I said, the final desired outcome is to schedule a second strategic plan workshop. So a little bit about the background. As I said, in 2017, 18, and 19, the city council and the city manager with a couple of key staff engaged in a similar process like today. It was a public meeting. The city manager followed an outline of different policy items for discussion. It was more of an informal discussion between council and staff, in which information was provided on a number of policy matters, from budget, personnel, capital improvement, just to name a few. And then from that, what I gather is that the capital improvement projects were then, if funding was available, brought up during the budget discussion process. And if it was the council's prerogative to move them forward, then they were included in the budget, and that's how they were moved forward. And then other discussion items that were discussed during the process, there would just be follow-up items. But what we couldn't find, and in doing research with the city clerk, there wasn't a follow-up report that said, here's the different policy objectives, here's the next steps, and then here's when we anticipate having those further discussions on them. So it was just more of an informal discussion. Going back as early as 1989, 96, 2000, and then in 2011, the city engaged in what is now known as the Shafter Vision. It was a community-driven effort for the community to identify priorities and create a vision for not only the organization, but the community as a whole. In 2011, the city undertook a process involving community members, approximately 60 community members, using the various forms of outreach to engage our residents and get as much participation as possible. And over the course of 6 months, to include approximately, I think, like 5 meetings that were held, the community members discussed different topics. At the end, there's a final report, which was included in your packet. Some of you are probably very familiar with it, having been here when that was adopted. And the 4 key takeaways or goals that the committee came up with are up here on the screen, focused on downtown, economic development, education, and recreation. And since 2011 forward, those have been the primary focus or priority objectives that the city council has been working on. And the budget reflects that when you look in terms of the improvements made to downtown, the economic development efforts with attracting not only large businesses, but also diversifying the local businesses within the city of Shafter. Education, as you well know, continues to be a key focal point for the community, for you. And we'll cover more about that here in our presentation. Recreation continues to be a focal point. More recently, just at the last couple meetings, you approved Prop 68 application to be submitted for funding. That's indicative of the commitment you as a city council has placed on those type of not only amenities, but projects to go after for development within our community. Also in the agenda packet, we provided to you a few samples of different strategic plans. The key elements of a strategic plan will include a mission statement. All of you that maybe have gone through this in your employment, you know that organizations have a mission statement. Basically, a mission statement is what do we stand for? How are we going to, what are those priorities that we will undertake, and how will we do that? The vision is just that. It's basically what I like to say is, what do we want to be when we grow up? And it's looking outward anywhere between 5 to 7, sometimes 10 years. And that's more of, this is what Shafter will be in 10 years. We'll be a vibrant community, economically stable, one of the safest communities in the region. That's an example of that vision. So that will also be part of one of the components of a strategic plan. Values, that goes to the organization values. That's in terms of what do you as a city council, as an organization, what are our values in terms of, like, for example, innovation, customer service. Those are a couple examples of oftentimes organizations will have stated values that help drive not only the culture, but the manner in which they respond to the community, the manner in which they conduct business. So that's a key element of a strategic plan. The other area is getting into the heart of what a strategic plan is, and that's identifying your strategic focus areas. These are oftentimes very high level overarching goals that you focus, similar to what you saw in the Shafter Vision 2011 that just said downtown, education, economic development, recreation. Those are one worded, but oftentimes it may just be a sentence, maintain financial sustainability, be employer of choice, for employee wellness. Those are other examples of high level overarching strategic focus areas. And then underneath strategic focus areas are the goals, in terms of how are we going to achieve being, an employer of choice. How are we going to be financially stable? We're going to put money aside in our reserves. We're going to be prudent in our investments. We're going to create a trust, 115 trust for addressing our PERS unfunded liabilities. Those are examples of goals. Objectives then gets into how are we going to achieve that? What's the task that's going to achieve us to create a 115 trust for unfunded liabilities? Well, that's going to require us to go through either the PERS or PARS to open up an account. And the city will then adopt a policy that says X amount of money from our budget will be deposited into a 115 trust. That's just an example of what an objective would be. So that's basically the components of what a strategic plan is. And as I shared with you, there is samples of that in the packet. So if you have any questions up to now, before I keep going on, I know I'm kind of throwing a lot at you. So good? Okay. A SWAT or a slot, most commonly, this was a practice that started in private business, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats. It's where an organization will conduct you're doing kind of like a self-evaluation of yourself in terms of those 4 different categories. I prefer to use substitute the W instead of using weaknesses, limitations, because it's not necessarily organizational weaknesses that you have. It just be more limitations, constraints that you may have within an organization that prevents you from certain tasks. So the strengths, limitations, opportunities, threats overview, as stated here, it's a function with the city council together with senior executive staff, oftentimes with community members. They undertake the exercise of engaging in a strategic plan session, which will include a SWAT. So these are, now we're going to get into here, our department directors are all available. This, as we get into this, the SWOT analysis, these are all items that we as a department directors participate in, they provided. So this is not just your city manager, but this is every one of your department directors who took the time to reflect, who took the time to assess and evaluate as an organization, not only the internal functions, but the external impacts as well. And so this is just a list that we came up. This doesn't comprise all the items that they may have identified when we talked about it. We took some of the more common threads, if you will, and this is what we identified. So as an organization, we acknowledge the fact that we have very knowledgeable staff, experienced staff. We have a lot of tenured employees. We have a lot of tenured department directors. And I think that's definitely a strength. That's nothing new that you're hearing. I think that's one of the areas of which you as a city council probably take a lot of pride in knowing that you have experienced staff at the helm of each of these departments, responding to the community, carrying out council directives, as well as implementing your strategic goals as part of the budget. Another strength is team family spirit among staff. One of the things I heard early on is the Shafter family and how this is a small organization in which everybody knows everybody, everyone cares for one another, not just in terms of a coworker, but personal relationships are planted, developed, nurtured. And, from what I understand, there was potlucks all the time, for one event or another, whether they were celebrating someone's engagement, upcoming wedding, baby shower, or birthdays, and it wasn't just staff, within a particular department, but a lot of cross-departmental interaction within the organization. And of course, my understanding is a lot of you have participated in these type of activities to help show that support towards staff. So this was one of the strengths that was identified. A diverse staff was another strength. meaning a diverse staff, not only just from backgrounds, but experience. I'll give one example could be like in our police department, where we have our officers from diverse backgrounds that may come from different agencies. The chief could recruit someone from the SO, someone from city of Delano or other cities. They bring diverse experience. They bring a diverse background to the department, and that different outlook or experience oftentimes helps generate new ideas, innovation into the organization and the way where the work is done. And so that was a positive. The strong reputation, Shafter is well known, has a good reputation as fostering economic development, as being an employer of choice, in which it's indicative of the fact that you have tenured employees that have come to work here and remain here. We've had some staff retire with 30 plus years, others that even like, for example, the now closed modified community correction facility, where you had people in 2011 that were laid off because the contract between the city and CDCR came to an end. But then 2013, when the city and CDCR entered into a new agreement, a lot of those employees that had been laid off in 2011 came back to work in 2013. So that's what we're talking about in terms of a strong reputation. People wanted to come back. And so, people want to be here and they want to stay here. Quality customer service. I think this is, again, one of the strengths the team identified. And the one-stop shop comprised of engineering, planning, and building, I think, again, is an example of customer service, where a developer can come in. And granted, it does put a lot of pressure on the staff, because we have to move those projects quickly from entitlement to plan check for them to break ground, and then during the inspections, project closeout, on and so forth. And so the customer service is key. If you have all heard the cliche that in business, time is money. And one of the things that the city has taken a lot of pride in is making sure that these projects are turnkey, whether it's, getting a tenant improvements in an existing building or new construction. The staff really strive in the one-stop center to get these projects going sooner rather than later. Other organizations, I can tell you, you hear the stories where, I went to the county, I went to city X, and they told me it's going to take 6 months, before I can even get my plans approved or get entitled. Here in Shafter, we don't hear that. Just to the contrary, you oftentimes hear it like, hey, we went to Shafter and we got our permits from day one to when we were breaking ground in 60, 90 days, right? You look at the wonderful industrial park, when you got, a 1 million square foot facility, and they're submitting their plans, and within 30, 45 days later, they're already starting some of the work. I mean, that's the type of customer service we're talking about. And in business and in the development world, that's definitely gold. That's an incentive for a lot of these businesses to be able to come to Shafter, knowing that they'll be able to open up their doors sooner rather than later. The city's financial health, that's something the city has always prided itself. I've talked to Mayor Prout, and she's giving me a lot of the history of going back to the 80s, 90s when she first got on council. And, the city was struggling financially in terms of how it was going to be sustainable. And they developed a plan focusing on economic development, revenue generating, being conservative, cost conscientious, as I like to call it. Being conservative doesn't necessarily mean you're cheap, because you can get high quality just at a low cost. And so those type of practices, policies have helped the city have a very strong footing in today's time. Surviving the pandemic like we did in just last year, contrary to other cities that have struggled, that did reductions of service, staff layoffs, the city Shafter did not have to undergo those type of concessions. And so the city's financial health is definitely very strong. I think another sign, that indicator, if you will, in terms of how financially stable the city is, the fact that the city of Shafter does not have a PERS unfunded liability. Your PERS unfunded liability is cumulative of current employees that have retired and future and current employees that will retire in the future. that the city has to pay for. Most cities carry anywhere between 60 to 70, 75, 80% of an unfunded liability. So they have to pay $1 million, and just throwing some numbers. Their unfunded liability is about $1 million. They may only be pre-funded, between 30, 35%. Shafter, you have a zero unfunded liability, which puts Shafter among the 385 or 387 cities, probably in the top 1-2% of cities that have a zero unfunded liabilities for PERS. And so that is a very strong indicator of how financially healthy the city is. I talked about the One-Stop Development Center, and that's obviously, like I said, it puts stress on the staff and moving these projects forward. But we see the reward when you're able to tour Walmart and Amazon and see all the high-tech improvements that are being made, and the plan checks were reviewed in almost record time. Although we weren't prepared for it, I think one of the things that we've been able to do fairly successful is virtual meetings. And I think that last year, this is an example that, we've been able to adjust to that. And Yasmina is now a black belt, Lean 6 in Zoom. And so we are continuing to move forward. But why that's important, and I think the team viewed it as a strength, is because providing services, providing access still to the public was important in terms of them getting information from the city of what was going on with the pandemic, but also too for them to continue to be engaged in what was going on in the city in terms of governance and what you as a city council have been working on, how you were responding to the pandemic, and all the different projects work that were still moving forward in spite of the circumstances we found ourselves in. We have a good multimodal mobile pedestrian bicycle system that continues to be expanded, trails, strong economic base. Again, that's without saying. And then, one of the things that I know Chief Zimmerman takes a lot of pride in is the safe community that we have. A couple of meetings ago, Chief Zimmerman provided you the stats for 2020. And you saw in the data provided statistically that we're one of the safest communities in the region. The fact that, and I'm not jinxing ourselves here, we've not had a murder in over five years is pretty impressive. Just 8 miles north, and I'm not going to say the name of the city, but they can't say the same, and there's other cities just in the region that can't say the same either. So again, I think that's a very positive strength for the city. Comments, questions? We're joined.
Thank you, Chief, for staying on top of the game on that and making sure, that the community stays safe. I just wanted to say that.
The multimodal pedestrian bicycle systems. I don't know how else to say it besides where. I know we have the Lerdo piece, but we're saying it's good. Are we talking good in the area, good in across the whole city?
Mayor Pro Tem Gibbons, probably the best way to describe it is good, but work in progress. I mean, and we're efforting to expand upon it as well.
Is that pedestrian and it's sprinkled throughout this, but is that pedestrian and bicycle part of what we're talking about SB 1000 and AB 617? Or is that something we're talking about doing completely off those two items?
I believe AB 617 is going to be the mechanism in which we address it.
Along with that, and I'm sure Mike is familiar with this, is the whole complete street concept, which is where now Caltrans is looking at cities if they've passed a resolution and basically not committing, but stating that they will work towards complete streets within their city, which incorporates, pedestrian, bicycle, more narrower streets to kind of reduce traffic congestion as well as vehicular traffic. The goal to try to get more people out of their cars and be able to use those type of roads, streets for the modes of transportation. So that'll be something that's ongoing. And just really quick to Councilmember Espinoza, Chief Lozano with the closure of the MCCF was kind of like, all right, they're out, but it created a headache for Chief Zimmerman because now these individuals that were paroled early as part of the pandemic, the whole COVID, they came right back into our communities. And I think Councilmember Lopez knows exactly what that's like because they probably saw some of their inmate population decrease. But that's what I'm saying, that there's an impact in one department, there could be an impact in the other because some of these individuals do come back into our communities. And it's oftentimes what we would call as unfunded mandate, because we have to respond to any increase in crime or this criminal element. And not only are we dealing with the kind of the average criminal, but these are more sophisticated because they've had time to hone their skills, if you will, among their peers while they were incarcerated. So.
And I think the prisoners that we had out at our facility aren't the ones that are coming back in here because we treated them well out there. So we're not gonna blame Lozano for that.
No,
one.
I'm not blaming Chief
No.
Lozano at
Well,
all.
I just, publicly I need to say that.
No, and also the states have shifted, you said on unfunded liability, the state has shifted the burden basically from the state to the counties and cities now, forcing our police officers here and our chief and everybody else to basically do a catch and release type of thing. County's not taking them, state's not taking them. I mean, I'm pretty sure that you can tell stories about people have been arrested multiple times in one day, and yet they're not going away and all they're doing is petty crimes, and they are committing crimes. I see them. I see them out and about, and unfortunately, it ties our law enforcement's hands.
Yeah.
And then pretty soon it's going to be a bigger issue next year when Department of Juvenile Justice is going to relinquish all their juveniles into the county now. So now they're not going nowhere. They're going to stay here in county. They're not going upstate no more. So now we got to deal with them here. That's an even bigger burden is going to happen. Plus the closure of 1 to possibly 3 prisons throughout the state. It's going to be even worse. And the closures of all the CCFs.
Right.
Yeah.
No, and you're correct, because what we also seen, and I saw this in other cities, is the county won't even, when you take them to jail, they'll just book them and then release them because they're not getting reimbursed for any of that cost in housing these suspects, for lack of a better term, in the county jails. They'll process them, and then right away it's a revolving door. They're right back, and they probably beat our officers back, not our officer, but they probably beat the arresting officer back to the same city, and they're right back into doing no good. So, but Shafter definitely is a safe community. In terms of limitations is outdated IT network security standards. And this is not so much that our IT network is not adequate. It's rather just that the sophistication of these hackers has far exceeded anything we may have seen in the past. And they're constantly trying to, again, lack of a better term, break into systems. And we ourselves were victims of ransomware. And so this is something that our IT manager identified that it's a limitation, more so because of what's happening and how sophisticated these hackers are becoming. Staff training as well. Obviously, this is something that is ongoing. It's just because oftentimes there's new requirements that we have to meet. I know that like in law enforcement, now they're introducing like diversity training, mental health, and how to identify. It may even include in how to identify someone who may not have a mental health issue, but may have autism and they're non-responsive. I mean, so there's a lot of different training that is oftentimes introduced, and we're trying to address, make sure our staff undertakes it. The team felt that there's sometimes because of the workload and how busy we sometimes are, we are more of a reactive versus proactive. And so that was identified as a limitation, not that we can't overcome it. It's just for the time being with the workload that all the departments have, they felt that it's something that we identified. Department-centric approach, flat organization, directors, line staff, limited number of mid-managers, limited revenue to implement the environmental justice recommendations. That's going to be coming back. And I think once it's adopted, that's the AB 1000 document. And I think there's going to be an expectation that some of those initiatives are actually implemented. So that's going to be a limitation in terms of revenue and how do we implement that, being that the state, again, this is another unfunded liability. They passed SB 1000 with the expectation that cities would adopt this into their general plans and then implement. So that's identified as a limitation. Obviously, the pandemic has limited our ability to engage the community in person, but we're hopeful that as people become more vaccinated and the economy continues to reopen and the state and the county lessen the restrictions, we'll be able to go back to doing more of the engagement with our community in person. Performance management, this is basically just having a good performance management system to measure our service levels. And so this was a limitation. Internship program, I think this is an area that we can continue to capitalize to have a robust internship program. This is good for when you have college students looking to get into engineering or trying to get into planning, human resources, finance. You oftentimes partner with the junior college, you partner with the university. Targeting, usually it's like the junior, senior in college that does internships. So I think there's an opportunity to expand on the internship program. Lack of standards, policies, and procedures. This is probably more of updating our standards, policies, and procedures. And so that's work that the different departments will continue to do. Organizational capacity. Organizational capacities refer to our ability to meet current and future service demand. We are a growing city. I think in the last couple of years, Shafter has been one of the fastest growing cities in the state based on population growth. As you know, there's approximately 3,400 new homes at Gossamer Grove, and then future development, there's probably another 3,400 infill homes here in the core city, in the core center of the city. Planners would tell you that each of those dwelling units generates 3.4 individuals per household. I've never met a 0.4 household person, but you know that's the figure that planners use to calculate the number of individuals in a household to get to a population number. So for us, it's basically preparing ourselves to meet that growing demand. Every new house is a new water meter. It's more linear feet in streets, more linear feet in sewer lines, and more parks. We got more space, more lawns to mow, more trees to maintain. So it's preparing ourselves on how we're going to create or enhance our organizational capacity to meet that growing demand. Traditional business systems and practice. This is simply just, we're trying to go more electronic, and the ERP, the Enterprise Resource Program, is an example of more automation versus traditional paper format. When, just an example, in the times I've been here, when leaf slips are done in triplicate form and they're still being processed manually and required signatures, electronically, we'll be able to just do it through a timekeeping system to where supervisors can approve it. It gets sent to payroll, and then when payroll runs, paychecks, all of that's just uploaded and it's automatically calculated. So we're working towards that. And I have a limitation with this mouse, so sorry. No. Oh, no. Oh, I went too far. Okay. So opportunities. So as I mentioned earlier, strengths and limitations are internal. They're within the organization. Now we're getting to external factors that impact an organization, and that's the opportunities and the threats. So in opportunities, what was identified is enhancing our public-private partnerships. Obviously, we have a good partnership with a number of private entities, and this was identified as an opportunity for us to continue doing more of that. We do have some city-owned land that's ready for development, and we have the former city yard. That's a policy objective that we're going to be talking about. We have the 40 or so acres that were bought, that, and part of that will include the new park. And so we believe that there's an opportunity to capitalize on bringing in new business in the city-owned land. And then hopefully we're able to secure the MCCF by getting CDCR to relinquish the lease. That's another economic development opportunity because it'll get city-owned land. And then you'd also have your owners of the frontage land on those 40 or so acres that we just sold to the recreation district. That's right on Lerdo Highway. So you have that opportunity as well to attract business. We have the wonderful industrial park that has been very successful for the city in terms of bringing jobs and recognition. Anytime a city can be on the newspaper that you have attracted a Walmart, a Target, and that particular now an Amazon is really good. And I think that's an opportunity that we can continue to have that partnership with the wonderful industrial park. The only downside when other investors or developers hear about, city of Shafter capturing a business like an Amazon is that they think that there's incentives to be given, because most cities that an Amazon goes into is because the city provided some form of incentives. And incentives could be in property tax rebate, it can be in offsite improvements that the city may have done. Interestingly enough, just a quick story, and Bob can, when you talk to him outside of today's meeting, he'll tell you that after the announcement of Amazon coming to Shafter, he had a number of inquiries from other like companies, not as big, but wanting to know more about what our incentives were. Because I think they were thinking that that's how we were able to land an Amazon. So it's good recognition, but the flip side is everybody thinks, oh, there's free money Shafter's giving away. Little do they know that we want their money. So obviously the opportunities, the getting the state to relinquish the 99-year lease, as I provided to you an update last night under the city manager comments, and we have the hearing scheduled before the Senate Public Safety Committee next Tuesday. And so we're hopeful that that'll be a positive outcome at the committee level for it to go push that a committee to the next committee for review. And then we're still going to be working with our lobbyists to be successful on the assembly side with the Assembly Subcommittee 5 to work towards including budget control language that in the event that the bill doesn't go forward, this is kind of like a belt and suspenders approach, if you will, that in the event the bill doesn't go forward, there'll be budget control language on the assembly side that will be included into the budget that would make CDCR relinquish the lease. So that's what is typically referred to as a belt and suspenders approach. Obviously, we have significant housing development in the pipeline. As I mentioned, there's about 3,400 homes at Gossamer Grove, another 300 or 400 infill. An opportunity to update the emergency operation plan. This is something that Chief Lozano has been working on. It's a work in progress. The current plan is adequate, but a lot has changed in terms of how to respond to certain incidents, whether it's man-made incidents or natural incident. And so we also have, in partnership with the county, OES, is they received grant funding, and Shafter is one of 3 cities that are participating with the county to have the city's emergency operation plan updated at no cost to the city. Chief Lozano has reached out to the emergency services manager at the county And obviously because of the pandemic and now they're rolling out all the vaccinations, mass vaccination sites at the county level, they've been focused on that. But she's acknowledged that it's still on the radar and that, as soon as time frees up for her, that we will be moving forward under the county to update the emergency operation plan. Strengthen community stakeholder partnerships. We have a good partnership with the high school, with Richland, with Grimway Academy, with the Shafter Parks and Recreation District. Coordinate infrastructure improvements with business investments, employee retention policy, training succession planning, automate our processes, land use agenda, document management. On the threat side, obviously we're anticipating the 2020 census results that based on our city charter, it calls for a review of our charter. And so we're waiting for those numbers. Lack of technology, limited staff, again, because of us being a growing community. Lack of time to focus on systems. I think some of the departments feel that because we are so busy that, we're addressing the workload to keep up. But part of a good organization is finding some time to kind of sit and think about how can we make our processes, our systems more efficient, more effective. And instead of making them consistent with best practices, is what's the new practice? And so that's something that we'd like to find some more time to do on. Pandemic protocols, reduce inspections, plan review, regional economy and oil industry. This is a big threat of what's happening in the oil industry. And so we are very mindful of that. Multi-generational workforce. You're seeing now anywhere between 3, 4, 5 different generations. When we say generations, is kind of, you got baby boomers, you have Gen X, you have millennials, now you have the younger generation. That creates a concern in that work ethics are different. You got the baby boomers who, to them, working 60, 70 hours was the norm. Now you got a younger generation that wants to work, 25, 30 hours, but get paid for 40 hours. And they just have a different work-life balance approach. And so it's about how we're going to be able to merge those different mindsets, if you will, of these different generations. Development of a flexible work program and policies. Obviously, a big threat is potential water rights change. We have our own issues going on with that in the city of Bakersfield. Now, at the current groundwater authority, as Mayor Pro Tem and Public Works Director James and myself have shared with you, DWR, the State Resource Water Control Board, released recommendations to change water rights. And so that's very much a threat to not only Shafter, but to the region, the farmer community, in terms of our economic base, if there's changes to how those water rates are appropriated. Employee retention. We want to continue being an employer of choice. We want to be competitive, not only with pay, but also in terms of how our employee wellness, our benefits. And I think we've been very successful in that. But obviously, as our budgets continue to have more demand because we're growing and those revenues become, more scarce, we have to be mindful of that. State legislation, one size fits all, related to housing, loss of local control, unfunded mandates. When you talk about housing, addressing housing issues, the state passes legislation that may be applicable in high density areas like the Bay Area, San Francisco, San Jose, Santa Clara, but it may not necessarily be applicable in the Central Valley. I know, right? But yet the state, does a one size fits all and don't understand or take into consideration the different dynamics geographically, but also in the sense of communities or cities. Here, we can afford, larger lots. We can afford to not go vertical, whereas in other cities, other parts of the state, they don't have that luxury. But yet the state will take away our local control in order to address whether it's homelessness or more affordable housing. And it does create a significant issue for us as we go forward. Decriminalization of various offenses. We just had, quick conversation about that, how, the state's releasing more inmates. You had Prop 57 from a couple years ago. The release of other prisoners whose offenses were downgraded to lower offenses and they're therefore released or paroled. And I think every indication is that that's going to continue. Councilmember Lopez, him being in that industry, working in that industry, that he just mentioned, they're looking at closing, 1 or 2, 3 prisons. That's further going to compound that issue. Without going into a lot of detail, we have Williams-Sonoma legal challenge. We also have the long-term service delivery demands increasing. This goes back to organizational capacity as we continue to grow, add more homes, and we add more residents. Staff retirements. I think we've seen a couple of those, and we're going to experience another one with the retirement of our planning manager, director. And when you have staff employees that have been with us 15, 20, 25 years, in some cases 30 years, that's a lot of institutional knowledge that exits the organization when they retire. And although Shafter's been faring this fairly well, we do anticipate that rising healthcare costs will go up. And so again, this is just what we see in the as trends or what we anticipate is going to be happening. It doesn't mean that's happening today. The items here are what we categorize as carryover policy discussion items from the 2019 City Council and staff strategic planning workshop. This is not encompassing all of them. This is just a review of some that we felt were still relevant today. And as we stated in the staff report, I think it warrants a future discussion of these items so that we can either decide to move them forward or decide that we're going to just bike rack them for an indefinite period of time, or we're just not going to pursue them for whatever reason. But I think we need to close the loop on some of these. So some of those is, for example, bringing back and having a discussion of what do you want to do with the former public works yard site? That's a prime real estate piece of land. And so I think it warrants a discussion to bring it back. I know that when the city council approved the acquisition of the new yard, there was talks about what are we going to do with the old yard? Is there housing? Is there development? Commercial development. So I think that's something to bring back, and that can be more in part of a comprehensive economic development strategy of what are we going to do with the city-owned land? Because not only do you have the public works yard, but you also have the land, the frontage land on Lerdo, as I mentioned, that was acquired as part of the recreation acquisition. You have the 40 or so acres here on North Highway 43. And so those are discussions I need to come back to council. In talking to staff, you have, as a council, have talked about the need or possible need for future fire station 2 to service the wonderful industrial park and the Gossamer Grove area. I think one of the things that we have going for us that allows us to not make this such a pressing issue is a couple of things. One, because of building codes, new residential requires fire sprinkler systems. And so that helps in that endeavor in terms of older homes don't have that. So in one regard, that's kind of like a plus. The other is the warehouses over at the industrial park. Those have very sophisticated high-tech fire suppression systems that in the event of a fire, the entire warehouse won't burn. I know Dennis could speak more to this and some of the building inspectors, but just knowing and getting a tour of the facility, that was one of the questions I asked Ignacio when we were touring Walmart. And they basically have a very sophisticated that allows to compartmentalize if there's a fire in a certain area of the warehouse, they can basically isolate that area and compartmentalize it to where it doesn't spread to the rest of the warehouse. And a recent conversation with Kern County Fire Chief, he acknowledges that, yes, that's definitely a plus in terms of what we have out there. So how that ties back is that the need for the fire station will be there. And I think it warrants a conversation of how and where we're going to site that, or whether it's over at Gossamer Grove or the industrial park. And also too, is how are we going to pay for that? One of my last cities I was at, just the price of a new fire station 2 years ago was between $9 and $12 million. And that's for about a 9,000 square foot facility, possibly like a 2 or 3, I think it was like a 3-bay station. Because what you want to do with these type of public safety facilities is not build for today, but build for the future. And so when you incur that cost, you want to make sure that, you don't shave too many corners to save money today, because 10, 15, 20 years from now, you're going to be saying, oh, we should have included some more rooms. We should include another bay.
I got a question. I don't know if there's even an answer to this, but have you guys ever got together and said in 10 years, how big the city's going to get, or 20 years, how many more people it's going to grow? 'Cause I know the census is going to tell us a lot, obviously. It's been 10 years, so we've grown quite a bit, but do we know how much we're going to grow? Or even think we're going to grow?
In terms of population, Wayne, have we ran that?
But that cost that you just quoted is $1,000 a foot, $1,000 plus. Is that price is based on a different area, I presume?
Correct. It's in the Bay Area.
$1,000 a foot, even for commercial or union, is a lot.
No, well, average price for type 2 engine, which is kind of what you see, with the 3-man crew, is probably between 750 to about $1 million. You get to a ladder truck, you're probably at $1.5 million for a ladder truck.
Hey, Dennis, what are the going rates for commercial right now? Public space like schools. So even if you tripled that, you're only $450 a foot. I mean, $450 is still high in my mind, but I think we can do it for a lot less if we had to go down that road. It's
There's
a
a-
big
yeah.
scary number.
And Mayor Pro Tem, there are alternatives to that. City of Oxnard, by way of example, they did more of a modular facility where it's not a mobile home, but everything is built off site, and then they truck everything in and they assemble it. A lot of schools are doing this. They've done it. I know you don't have experience with that, Mayor Pro Tem, and the cost is a lot less. I mean, it's not very, I'm not going to say it's 50% less, but it's a pretty significantly less than traditional brick and mortar construction on site. So there's some different options in looking at that. But even if we were looking at $5 to $7 million for a new station, that's something that, how we're going to pay for it. And then not only that, but maintain it. And so that is something to be thinking about. The Kern County Fire Department with whom we contract and have since, I believe, like 1983. They are doing what's called a standard of coverage, SOC. The standard of coverage analysis report is what a fire department will do to look, and it's very intricate, very complex study, but basically in a nutshell, they look at response times where the current fire station's at. They look at the city limits of a city, and they look at response times from the station to the different corners of the city limits. And they use that to identify where they're meeting the response time. Most departments have performance measures anywhere between 6 to tops 8 minutes from the time the call is received to when the engine's on site. And that's when they consider the call closed. And the average time that is an industry standard is between 6 tops 8 minutes. So when they're looking at that in the standard of coverage analysis, it will identify where they have pockets that they're not meeting that time. And that's what they use to then plan where that second or third or fourth fire station is needed to be able to meet in a radius that time frame. Because the way they work then is they shift engines around, but meeting that performance measure of the response time is how they look at where those fire stations are needed or should be planned in the future. And so in talking to our chief, our fire station's right around the corner, like not all, but from here to when they get to Gossamer Grove or Wonderful, if it's being deployed from here, the time is more in the 9 to 10 minute response time by the time they actually get there. So in 10 minutes, when you're looking at a structural fire, I'm not a firefighter, but having had fire departments in the past and fire chiefs, they'll tell you that a house can burn almost like in less than 2 minutes, just because of how a fire will engulf, a structure. And so when you're talking about response times of 8, 10, 11 minutes, that makes a significant difference. And so foreseeably, where we are going to need that second fire station will be somewhere along 7 Standard Road to be able to meet that the needs of 3,400 homes plus the future growth of the industrial park.
Is there another station available that would respond to Gossamer Grove besides this one?
Yeah, so the city of Bakersfield and the county will have auto aid agreements. A lot of fire, just like police, but fire will have auto aid agreements, which is like boundary drops. Basically means that one fire engine will go into another city if they're the ones primarily getting the call. So if our fire truck is, say, helping Wasco, for example, they'll pull an engine from the city of Bakersfield to come backfill into Shafter. So to your question, Mayor Prout, if our engine is not available to respond to Gossamer Grove, most likely an engine, if it's not a county fire engine, an engine from the city of Bakersfield will respond.
But
and
did
take
they
that call.
identify the station that could respond out there besides ours?
When
I
you-
mean, you've talked to the county, so have they said what stations or what is the coverage in order to warrant the station out there? How many people and how much value in the economic part?
So they look at it again in response times, and there's right there, I think it's Allen Road and Olive, City of Bakersfield is supposed to be building, I think, Station 18. That's been sitting there. And talking to one of the previous city managers going back 10, 15 years ago, there was talks for Station 68 that was going to be built out there along 7 Standard. And there was talks going on between the city of Bakersfield and the county. But those talks have not gone anywhere. So the exact station, if I'm understanding the question, that may respond from the city of Bakersfield into Wasco, I don't have that information, but it's information I can get to council in terms of how and which is the closest fire engine to Gossamer Grove that they currently serve.
But has the chief said to you when it warrants another station out there, out in that area?
In terms of a trigger point, no.
Seems like population numbers as well as the value of what we have going up even in the industrial park.
Yeah, he's not told me to say, hey,
Nothing.
when you get to,
I've never heard it.
2000,
Yeah, I've
to
never heard it
2000,
before.
homes, or when you get to, X amount of square feet of warehouse space over at the industrial park, you need to build a station. No, he's not shared that with me. And I don't know if they've done that type of analysis for that.
Well, I know the feeling was always such that we would want to see it as a county station versus a city of Bakersfield. Because as I told you, there's been always a big butting of heads with city and county. And so because of Allen and Olive, it seemed logical to us that we could say, you know what, let's get that station in there. And Well, I mean, we've had talks with them for years, so it's not new.
Right. And there is
No, talking with county, and the county's always been willing, but I didn't. City, yes, it is city.
yeah.
Yeah, so, that's what I just wanted. I mean, we've never talked about money, but we've talked about different possible sites. And the county's always been willing. I mean, they can locate a station, so, but
Right.
when does that number come? I didn't know.
Yeah, they don't have a number that he's not shared it
Okay.
with it. Some cities will have that as part of kind of whether it's part of their general plan
Mhm.
or their what's specific plan that may be under construction that says by the 1,000 building permit, a new station shall be built or whatever that number is. But no, to answer your question, the fire chief has not said you need to build one by this date or by this matrix, if you will.
Gabriel, do we know, was it gonna be 1 unit or 2 units? 2 fire trucks or 1
So-
fire truck?
That's a good question, Councilmember Espinoza. Most fire stations will have just the one engine, which is a 3-man crew. And that's, fire unions will tell you that this industry standard is 4 personnel per engine, but there's no real data supporting that. Most cities or counties that have, well, cities or, county, they operate under the 3-man firefighter per engine. And it's typically 1, unless it's a large fire station in a metro area, may include more of a, paramedic, quick response vehicle, a type 2 engine, and maybe a ladder truck. City of Bakersfield, they're more populated areas, probably have stations like that. But in our areas, it's probably just gonna be a type 2 engine at the station.
Well, I was thinking about what you were saying, how, don't cut corners when you're doing this and plan for the future and all that. And with the growth that's expected out there, I mean, possibility for 2 trucks being there wouldn't be out of the realm, would it?
No, for future growth, we're just kind of hypothetically speaking here, because of the height of those buildings, you would probably want, I think the county would tell you they would want a ladder truck out there versus a smaller engine, which makes sense. At what point does it warrant the ladder truck and a type 2 engine? Obviously that's based on continued growth. But that's definitely something that, to your question, we would need to be mindful. But I can tell you that, and Dennis can tell you the height of those buildings, I mean, it would most likely warrant ideally a ladder truck out there.
What is our current police response time to Gossamer? A unit in the area. For police services, what's the average response time that we should be looking at? Okay. I mean, I know we talked in the past that would be it would be a proposed fire station, but a combo, right? So police and fire. But I mean, if we're gonna do cost sharing, could you add a third with like the sheriff's office? Is there a way to do a 3-way cost sharing in this? Would that make sense or no? I'm just asking. I don't know how much sheriffs go in that general area, and Bakersfield obviously continues to expand to the north.
Just have a quick question. We're not planning to build our own city fire department, right? Okay, so I'll make sure that's understood. Okay.
No,
It's always going to be a partnership with the county.
Kern County is what's commonly referred to as a contract county, that we can't go off on our own without basically going through a process of trying to go independent. And then that's only you becoming your own, but you have to basically notify the Kern County Fire Chief that we plan to go on our own. We have to kind of go through a process. One, the cost to establish your own department, it's a pretty significant.
Yeah, but so most of, in this conversation that we're having, it's always gonna be a partnership, or pretty much the county's gonna have a big say in it, right?
Yes.
So, okay, so
When the Shafter Fire Station was built back in the eighties, surprisingly, the cost was about 650,000 for that station. And we should have bought two of those or paid for two. The city participated, I believe, in 20% of that cost. So the city of Shafter is, I believe, 20% owner of the current fire station. So there's some precedence there in terms of when we talk about future stations, the county's going to own it. They're going to operate it. It's basically their asset. And going back to the mid 80s, when the new one was built, we have a contract that we participated by 20%. So I think that's the starting point when we talk about cost sharing and who's going to build it and whatnot.
we may want to have, we might have a wish list, but basically the county's gonna determine where to put that the new fire station, and what side of the fence that they want to put it, right?
So in
Or
terms,
do we have a big say? No, we want it in the Shafter to cater to Gossamer Grove and, or the
No.
new logistics.
Right. so current fire is our fire department. I mean, instead of it saying county fire, you can just imagine it saying, Shafter Fire Department. So when we talk about adding a second fire station, we're talking about adding a second fire station for the city of Shafter, the service, the city of Shafter. So in terms of, do we have a say? Do we want it a Wonderful? Do we want it a Gossamer Grove? Yes, the city will have a say on that, as well as the data that's part of this standard to covered analysis that will show response times and whatnot. But yes, most likely that second station is going to be needed around that 7th standard, which you as a city council will have a say. We have land at Wonderful, or no, we're going to buy it from the developer, or the developer's going to dedicate it, a couple acres, then you want it at Gossamer Grove. They would, I believe, would still meet that response time going from Gossamer over the stations there with the substation. Response time to Wonderful is probably under a couple minutes, 3 minutes, because of the short distance that it goes.
So we could actually push this project if we justify it with the county, being that pretty much under their umbrella.
I'm sorry, the question?
If it's an account, if it's gonna be ran by the county, correct?
Yeah, because
Oh,
they're
okay.
our
So-
fire department.
Right, so we could actually push that project if we justify that we need another fire station in the logistics center or near Gossamer Grove, right?
When
Or
you say
we-
push it, you mean
push it
for
as
them
far
to
as-
build it?
Right, or have them to do a buy-in.
Those are conversations that, as you know, I've shared with you,
Right.
we're gonna be going into come this summer. The county administrative office and the city, we've agreed to start contract negotiations July of this year for a new fire contract. So those are the type of discussions that we'll be engaging in terms of when will we build it? Who's gonna pay for it? What's that cost sharing look like? Service models, do you want a ladder truck? We obviously, unless they have a ladder truck that they can put that out there themselves, or we're looking at a type 2. There's also, a quick response vehicle, which is basically a paramedic unit that we can talk to them that would address our calls for service. A lot of your calls for service in the city are typically medical calls. Anywhere between 85, 90, sometimes, 95% of your calls. I believe structural fires in Shafter in 2019, I believe, were maybe like 20 or 21. And I think 5 or 7 of those are more in the unincorporated area, like La Colonia, or for example. And so most of the calls they go on is medical calls. So a quick response vehicle allows you to have paramedics on it, and you go from 3 men to 2 or women on a quick response vehicle to respond to medical calls. So that's also an alternative service delivery model. So some different options on size of fire station. You can also put a temporary mobile station, motorhome, not motorhome, but a trailer out there that can serve as a temporary fire station, because all they really need is, the basics, necessities, some sleeping quarters, some cots, bathrooms and whatnot, and then somewhere to park the truck. Right. Yeah. So some different options, but those will be further talks that we'll be having as we begin contract negotiations with the county and the CEO's office.
I have a question for Chief. If we do put this police substation out there, are you gonna increase your number of officers or do you have enough working with you right now?
Once it's open, everything that we're doing in the Proxima Road right now, it's we're taking down statistics about how often we're there, how often we need to be response. Was already factored in. So the short answer is we can handle it right now. Staff will have once we open the substation, I expect we need more staff.
And then what do you think you would need out there? 2, 3 officers?
I'd say a minimum of 4 officers, 1 senior officer in charge. And then we're gonna have a storefront. The community is gonna come in. We gotta have support staff there briefly as well. So,
Okay, thank you.
Just a quick comment on that, Councilmember Espinoza, Mayor and Council, is there's also not only the statistical data to justify adding the personnel, but I think there's also the expectation of the community out there that they're eventually going to want a stronger police presence out there other than just, they're going to want their own patrols, right? They're going to want visibility out there of our police officers, of our police department. And that just comes naturally with any community where, you know, they expect a certain presence of the police, you know.
Dennis, what's the current count of homes out there? Not including future build for this year, just current built. Thank you.
I think I'll douse that fire station for now. Aquatic center improvements. I'm going to ask Mike to give us a quick update on the pool situation and you know what is needed to reopen that. So, Mike.
Honorable Mayor, members of the Shafter City Council, as you may recall, the city received community development block grant funds that we intend to use for a covered picnic area that the facility currently lacks. The dilemma for the council and the community essentially is what kind of a game plan do we have should that picnic structure be completed? Because we currently lack an operations agreement for any type of pool use there. And the pool itself and the equipment are in pretty bad shape from a lack of an operations agreement and an effective operations plan. So in the coming weeks, we could present a construction award for the picnic structure assembly. But the dilemma is, I stated, that we lack an operations agreement and we really lack any expressed interest in continuing with an operations agreement at this time. The rec district, which had taken the lead on everything at the pool, with the exception of the electric bill, as you know, canceled the agreement with the city, I believe last year. And so the city is not staffed to run rec programs, or we certainly don't have the staff to stay at the pool and oversee the pool. So no, we don't have any conceptual plans. We haven't discussed plans to resume anything this summer.
Okay, I don't know if you wanted me to go into more detail, but the rec district is now ready to talk about doing a program, but the pool isn't available to be used. And my question is, would we even have it ready to be for this summer?
The city manager and I discussed the prognosis for that as far as costs go. And I could tell you that I foresee at least $50,000 to $100,000 in costs to fix leaks, resurface the pool deck, and give the pump and motor the proper attention it needs to avoid having to go there on a daily basis to, fix things here and there. It's way past due for some much needed improvements. And I think a realistic price tag to get the pool, the pump and motor, as well as the restrooms and the lockers in adequate shape is easily 100,000.
But it won't be available then at all this summer.
At the present time, we did not budget for that scenario. But that's if the community, the council wishes to pursue that, then I think that's a number you could probably expect.
Well, Gilbert and I were in on that last meeting that we had with the committee from the rec district, and when they decided in January, a year plus ago, that they didn't want to have a program in there because they weren't going to do the maintenance that needed to happen. And I understand that. But the deal was that wait till we had a city manager on board so that we could come back together and see what we could do as partners. And so the high school now has to transport their swim team out of town. And of course, the summer program isn't going to happen because we haven't put out the money to maintain it. So that answers the question now that it's not going to be ready for this summer. But what do we want to do as the plan? It's the responsibility of the city to maintain that. And when we went out and thought we were going to build a new one and it cost $4 million to do what we were going to do was kind of far out. So that came off the drawing board too. But we need to decide what we're going to do if we've got the assets sitting over there and nobody can use it. And we need to have a plan to be ready for it. And if the rec district is willing to talk about it again so that they can run the program, I mean, there is a plus.
I guess I'm still, if there was an approval to do the work, we still wouldn't have it ready for summer. Is that what we're understanding?
Well, what we have ready for your consideration is simply a picnic structure that was to, when it was awarded through the Community Development Block Grant Program, we still had an active pool agreement. And it took this long really to get that project in a position to put out the bid, being that it was administered by the county. But no, we have realistic numbers that we proposals for needed rehabilitation work. And that'll get you going. But beyond that, you also have to decide how we're going to fund the ongoing operation and maintenance and, the natural gas bill for to heat the pool and the electricity bill. And I'm not sure if you've toured the interior of the restrooms and the locker rooms. There's a lot of work to be done. And I think the 4 million that the mayor was referring to was strictly for the building itself and not necessarily for the exterior, what people really come to the pool for. So first and foremost, I think through some discussions with the district, the high school, maybe the private swim clubs, it should be identified what the purpose of the pool is going to be. Are we going to rent it to certain, the high school or private swim clubs that run special events? Or are we going to have public access? And if so, who's going to be responsible for staffing and overseeing the operation during those times? So you really have an operations plan or objective that we need to decide on before we really invest considerable funds in that facility.
When's the last time we sat down with the rec?
I just said January.
And I have not.
Last year.
Uh-huh.
But I'm asking staff, last time you guys have actually sat down and had a full-on conversation about operating this.
The last time I had a serious discussion about use of the pool was with the high school a month or so ago, a few weeks ago, only because COVID made the realistic reactivation of the pool in question. I mean, there really wasn't a timeline to even consider that until a few weeks ago. And unfortunately, the high school having little notice about when they could, act as if they were in the red tier. I mean, they didn't have an active agreement with the city to use the pool because that was typically renewed every year. And we would get council approval to do it on a year-to-year basis. Right. And normally that was done in December of every year, but because we just didn't have a realistic time frame, the high school district didn't approach us about the prospects of using the pool until like a few weeks ago.
Swim club is coming up now. The kids that do it in the summertime. I mean, that's been a routine deal. So it just hasn't been dealt with for almost a year and a half now. And the decision has to come first from the city. When you agree, I mean, we got to decide what we're going to do, and then we got to see if the rec district's going to be interested in doing the programs over there.
I think we have to facilitate some discussions with the district as well as the swim clubs that have used the facility in the past. And maybe even Richland School District has a stake in this as well. They were a party to a separate agreement when they were doing separate programs at the pool. So it really warrants discussion that I think the city as the owner of the facility should
Right.
take the lead on.
That's what it sounds like. That's why I was asking the question. It kind of sounds like everyone's got to come back to the table and just ask, especially with the rec, are you guys willing to be the operator once again of this? If so, that at least allows them to come back and say,
Right.
listen, we have someone they're going to sit and do the operations. Everyone wants to sign the MOU. We've got these people lined up. We just have to determine the fix of the pool. And that's a conversation to have. But talking about a fix of the pool when we haven't had the conversation with anyone to operate it, right? And I say that because I've had the conversation with Philip recently in the last month, and he's asking me what we're doing with the pool. And I asked the same question back. Well, why'd you guys back out of the pool?
Right.
And it's a ha moment, but I think that the board is ready to sit back in this and say, hey, what does the operation look like? Maybe we should jump back into this. Something's got to give. We need to probably set up a meeting to bring those folks back to the table. And you're right. You have the high school, you have Richland, you have the privates, you have the rec, and then you have us. And I think that whole group needs to come back and say, what's the use? What are we wanting to do here? We need to know so we can start making decisions from our body.
Correct. And the district has the benefit of a couple of years worth of actual maintenance experience to know what the costs are and what it truly takes to run a facility like that. So hopefully, that past perspective will lead to some, more realistic operations plans in the future.
But I'm going to share with you, if the others are not willing to come forward and be part of it, I mean, it's just a big money hole out there. It definitely is. And that's what we need to find out. I mean, is the community going to respond? Philip couldn't tell me that for sure. I happened to run into him just last week, and we had a little bit of discussion on it.
And the council should know that, the CDBG funding that amounts to 83,000 at this point. If ultimately that facility is not used as a pool, or we decide to do something different with that facility, then that 83,000 has to be refunded back to the program. So I believe use of this facility entailed some potential refund of past CDBG funds when it was the county facility. So just something to be mindful of, that it's, when you have a near-term project to consider, and if you think that we're going to head in a different direction, then it may not be advisable to proceed with that project.
Thank you.
So, Mayor and Council, what I'm understanding is we'll follow up with the rec district. I think it's what I'm understanding for as a first step, and then we can come back and report to you.
You've got rec, Richland, Shafter High, and the private, like Stingrays and whoever else are the private entities that are using it. And I would presume our staff too, and I don't know who sits on the boards here, but.
So that's my understanding. We'll follow up on that and engage those groups with on those discussions. Report back to you.
Is that taking into consideration the public use during the summer months? Okay. Okay.
The next on the list is City Hall relocation options. Last year, we did a status quo budget because of the pandemic, and not knowing at the time there was concern with the economy and what was going to happen with it. And so we postponed any CIP projects that were being general fund funded. In this case, the City Hall project was postponed. So, but it's still something to have a conversation about. As all of you go to City Hall, it's a building built in the 1930s. Is I think the federal kind of program that helped build a lot of these government facilities to put workers to work that were undergoing the recession. WPA, I think, is the the agency that, federal agency that built it. So we do own some land, whether it's strategically for a civic center or not, that's a topic of discussion. But it is something that you have had, not only in 2019, but I believe also in 2018 as a discussion item of whether we were gonna move City Hall and then where.
If I may, we had monies set aside specifically for capital improvements for police station, fire station, for city hall, for a variety of things. Is it going to still show in the budget?
So I like to do, I know that we didn't fund them this year, so if it's projects that you want to bring back as part of this year's CIP, we'll bring them back. But we didn't spend that money, so if it's earmarked for that, which I believe it was, then those monies would still be there. We just reduced the operating budget to not include those capital projects.
I believe what we did was we actually pushed that back a couple of years in
Did
the
we?
CIP,
Okay.
and I think we had more like feasibility studies and maybe preliminary funding for some of those projects. I think we had a very minimal amount this
Yeah, it
fiscal
was.
year, but I think what we did, we just pushed that
Pushed
back
it
a
out,
couple of
okay.
years. So we have placeholders, but they may not necessarily be fully funded, but at least it's on our radar.
Thank you.
Fiber optic network, that's something that Scott can speak more to. If you want to get more into details, I can have him come up. I know Mayor Pro Tem has shared with us some of the concerns. We have them as well with one of the operators that we use now and whether or not they're being responsive to the needs of the customer. So we'll be bringing that back to council. Improvement and repairs to existing parks with lighting, electrical turf. We have an idea, a suggestion to add a second diamond field at one of our parks at very low cost. We can bring that back as part of the budget, but obviously this was a carryover from 2019 that was identified that we need to do some other improvements at our existing parks.
To backtrack, yes, we do have the concerns about potential operator for the fiber optic network, but I think that note is more than just an operator question, but it's an expansion question, right? I don't know when the last time we expanded that network. I thought it was down Los Angeles to Grimway. Is that correct? So it's been 5 years, 4 years. It was a little ways back. Okay. So I guess the question I have on that one is, have we looked at what the next phase is and how we roll that out? Like finding our way to get to the high school or Sequoia Elementary and, potentially going downtown. What does that look like? Are we the ones to build it? Is the operator the one to build it? Are we partnering with them? I mean, it's a litany of questions we can ask, and I don't think we have the answer to, but it's something to start addressing.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, amenity additions to existing parks, courts, fields. So this is, like I said, a 2019 carryover. I think parks was discussed, amenities in 2018. You don't have to make a decision, but these are just, again, items that were previously discussed in terms of what you want to do moving forward. Another carryover is a council staff vision and priorities to create a new vision, prioritize the work, i.e. strategic plan. Business development, large business chamber outreach. This is, we talk about that, Bob? gonna have Bob give us a quick.
And that would conclude my remarks. In spite of that, Honorable Mayor and members of the Shafter City Council, I'll continue anyway. That event, the large business chamber event, was last held early in 2018. And we haven't endeavored to do that again yet with the growing number of companies out in the wonderful industrial park. We may well need to bring that back. As far as, and the idea of that, as I understand, because it was prior to my coming to Shafter, was to keep in touch with them and their set of issues that were different from small businesses in the core. But certainly the outreach, which is something I try to do on my own, will continue to be with those both large and small. So we probably may not have a formal kind of program like that again, but perhaps a little more outreach on my part. If I could too, I could just to add on to what Scott mentioned about fiber optic. I was on a Zoom call on Monday, and Vince Fong, Assemblyman Vince Fong, was on there, and it was a Hispanic chamber, and there was probably 30 or 40 folks on there, and he was talking about services delivering to the communities. He said, we need to follow the city of Shafter's example. They provided fiber optic for their residents and their businesses because no one else in the county is doing that. We need to talk to them about how they provide that and how they give that great level of service that the rest of the county is not. It was his unsolicited comment. So I just wanted to pass that on.
It's an incredible comment, but it's what we did, not what we're doing. And that's what scares me, is what we've done is put us to where we're at, but what are we doing now to take us to the next 10 years?
Rail operations, Mayor and Council, that's an item that we brought to you as part of the mid-year budget review, which we continue to work on, and we'll bring more information to you. Strategic property acquisition ties back to finding land to acquire eventually for some of these facilities that we're talking about, whether it's the substation, fire station, city hall. Emergency Operations Center, training and equipment, county OES, Office of Emergency Services cooperation. Talked briefly on the grant that we have as one of 3 cities with Kern County. And I've shared with you that we are repurposing a section of the former MCCF facility. It's ideal for basically a turnkey EOC. And so it required minimal cost to convert it from, it's already got the cubicles, the 4 different sections that you would need, which is finance, logistics, operations, and planning. And then it already has a conference room in the same area for having the team meet. You have separate offices, you have restrooms, you have sleeping quarters. And for anybody that gets out of hand, we can throw them in a cell. And so I'm just joking. And so There's been some work that's been done, and again, Chief Lozano has been the lead on that. And as he transitions from corrections, he's getting into the emergency management services of the city. And the EOC and the EOP are two of the projects he's working on. Veterans Park, and talking to our public works director, there's still a need for additional parking on the north of the park. Any questions on that? Can I have Mike talk on that? Mike?
If memory serves me right, we were potentially looking at the property to the west of Veterans Park that was acquired by the district with the intent of developing a new school, and which was later determined not to be feasible, that there is potentially a parking option on that property. And I certainly don't think the council wants to carve into the existing fields to develop another parking lot, but I think that's the, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that was the intent, was to explore that opportunity to provide parking option. So we're not crowding Rodeo Avenue, the street to the north.
I remember the original discussion with the former city manager, and we tried to see if we can acquire that piece of property from the elementary, and they pretty much said no. They said no, even though they're not going to build anything on it, they still didn't want to do it. And the main thing was parking and offer, I believe, a baseball field of some sort out there as well. That was the plan, which seemed amazing, but they did not want to budge. I don't know if that's changed. Now that everything's opening back up, I don't know if that's changed, if they want to get rid of that property or not. That's something that I think you guys should discuss with them, with the elementary. It's a nice piece of property, and it would fill a huge void here within the city of Shafter, which is another, whether it's a basketball court or a baseball field or some sort.
Well, perhaps when we conduct the aquatic center discussions, Richland will probably have a seat at the table, and we could probably use that as an opportunity to see if anything's changed.
Trade, and they didn't even want to trade, but we could always go back.
Correct.
Mhm.
We had discussions about even sharing the bus,
Right.
moving the bus more with us,
Right.
and they didn't want to.
No, they can't. They have some issues, so.
And I'm glad you said that, because it was literally us trying every avenue, them saying, we don't want to give it to you, but we also don't want to use the land. And it didn't make any sense why. So
Yasmina just confirmed that we need to have a break. I need a break, so we're gonna call a break. She suggested 5 minutes, but 5 minutes goes pretty fast, so we need to have a break. We're not going very far, except for maybe down the hallway or make a little noise like we did before. But anyway, I'm gonna recess for a while for a break. And it's 4:40, so we'll give you 5 or 10 minutes. I mean, we'll see how it goes.
5:40.
5:40.
We will change the clock.
yeah, that clock's an hour behind.
Oh, okay. No wonder I have to go. I have to go back.
Oh, did it?
everyone can come back to order. We don't have a whole lot to go through, and we just need to keep moving here and finish up. Yes, a couple more slides to go, so.
Land the plane, here we go.
Okay, we're ready.
Thank you, Mayor, Council. The last item on the carryover is a review of city council norms. So that can come back as part of the strategic plan. It's my understanding that you wanted to have a conversation about the norms. So we can agendize that as part of the next workshop. We'll see more on that on the next steps.
Did you do something on the truck parking?
Oh, I did. Yes. Truck parking, thank you, Mayor, was another carryover item. As you know, our Public Works Director has brought this item forward that we're going to do some community outreach and engage the community to get some input on this topic. And so we will be engaging on that here in the coming months. As you know, Mike and staff were working on the Prop 68 grant. And now that that's been submitted, it's freed up some time. So we'll start focusing on this particular item.
Good, thank you.
Okay. Now we're going to get into near-term objectives and future objectives. These are policy objectives that were identified both on the short term that we foresee in the current, like present to within a 12 to 18 month timeframe. The future objectives is a little bit further out in the next probably year to 2 years, items that we should be mindful that we see coming down the pipeline that we either need to bring back to you as future policy discussion items or projects that we would need to undertake. As we said, with the 2020 census figures coming out, we will have a charter decennial review as required by the charter. So we'll have to talk about how you want to proceed with that, whether it's a community work group that undertakes that task to look at the city charter, to identify any changes to it. So that'll be a process in itself and how we go about doing that. Automate systems of policies and procedures and process. This is something we continue to do, not only with the implementation of the new financial system, the ERP, but as we will continue to look at automating our with an land management system, our record keeping, and even how we prepare our agendas to go from paper to automation. Digitized records, that's our Laserfish software application to get our records in electronic format. Improve our city cybersecurity systems. You saw this as one of the limitations in the SWAT analysis. And so this is something that our IT manager and staff identified as something that we will need to have further discussions. Most likely it will require some budget appropriation to be able to buy additional software or security capabilities. Develop a city intranet. This is similar to an internet concept, but it's internal for the organization. It's a tool that we can use that, for example, HR can use to put different forms on there. It can be sharing of information. It can be community newsletters. It could be a bulletin. You know, it's an internal organization platform. Implement solid waste diversion program and fees. This is basically the SB 1383. We made a presentation to council at the last study session that we had just a couple weeks ago, and next steps. And so our public works director, myself, and our consultant are working on bringing that plan back to you as we said we would. And so we also have our city attorney's office working on a draft ordinance. That is one of the first steps that as a city council you'll need to adopt in order to implement SB 1383 by January of 2022. Water quality and conservation objectives. Again, this is an item that we'll continue to work through, not only as the Kern Groundwater Authority, but also in terms of trying to resolve the issue with the city of Bakersfield and Kern River and the matter that we are a party of. And water is obviously an item that we have to be very mindful of with the number of homes we have planned. You know, we need to make sure that we have not only a water supply that's adequate today, but it's long-term and it's sustainable long-term. College transition programs. This is something that as we continue to enhance our education center, but also too are looking to expand our partnership with Richland, with the high school, and even Bakersfield College. We have labor negotiations again this year with both recognized groups that we have, SEIU and the Police Officers Association. And so that's something that we'll be working on as well. Development of a comprehensive economic development strategy. SEDS. The city prepared one several years ago as part of an Economic Development Administration grant. That part of applying for EDA grant funding is that a city has a SEDS, an adopted SEDS for its organization, and there was one that was prepared several years ago, and so we'll need to update that document if we plan to pursue additional EDA grants. Our Public Works Director has been talking with a grant writer, and we are pursuing the possibility of securing some EDA funds for some infrastructure related projects here in the city. And so we'll need to develop or update the SEDS that we have on file and submit that to EDA. Obviously the budget and the capital improvement budget. Last night, you had consensus on the dates for the workshops. So we'll be coming back to you with more information on the process itself. Our Senate Bill 385, I've talked on that and where we are in terms of the process. Obviously hiring a planning director. We keep trying to get Wayne to stick around, but I think he's already looking to retirement.
I'm pretty sure he agreed to it tonight.
All right. We'll cancel the recruitment. All right. As I mentioned, we are going to be commencing contract negotiations with Kern County Fire this July, August timeframe. Housing inventory and impacts as it relates to our state legislation. Economic development strategy plan, our strategic plan that's basically falls under SEDS. Well, I should have taken that out. The Council Ad Hoc Committee and Shafter Library Operation Options Work Group. Last night you approved the amendment to the master agreement. And as follow-up from Mayor Pro Tem Givens to myself and staff is we'll bring something to you in the next 30 days of a framework. Our education director, Dr. Franz, has already prepared one. So it looks like we might be able to come to the second meeting of April with a proposed framework for you. Introduce and adopt a communication strategy, including crisis communication. We have a draft plan and we'll be bringing that to you possibly the second meeting of April for your review and consideration. And the communication strategy just lays out and standardizes the manner in which we communicate and engage our community. The crisis communication component is basically having a ready templates that in the event of a natural incident or a man-made incident, whether it's like, for example, derailment, an earthquake, having a template for press releases already prepared that on a moment's notice we can send out. And that's an example of having a crisis communication and these templates readily available. The Learning Center expansion with GAF, as you know, that's underway. And just, I believe last week, staff sent to you the renderings in color of what those improvements are going to look like. Future policy objectives, as I said, these are more so in the next 1 to 2 years. Agreement with the Chamber of Commerce. The city has had a longstanding partnership with the Chamber, and the city has provided in-kind support to the chamber as part of the relationship that the two entities share. Having an agreement would just basically memorialize the roles and responsibilities of each of the entities of which they will do. That way it's an understanding of what the chamber's role is and what the city's role is. It's a common practice in which cities will often enter into with their chambers to promote their partnership, but also to have a clear delineation of what one or the other entities will do. Find a developer to repurpose the MCCF facility. As you know, part of the work we're doing for SB 385 is one of the things that our legislators have asked is what will the city do with the facility if we do pass this bill? And so one of the things that we have very preliminary is conversations with Bakersfield College in which they may be looking at expanding, and they received some grant funding to start a vocational, David, help me out here, technical vocational education. What's the term that Romeo? Yeah, something like that. It involves,
What does that include, by the way?
so
That's actually the almost identical thing we talked about when I first came on. I remember that was one of my dreams to have something like that here in Shafter. I think that'll be a great idea if you guys can make that happen, if everything goes well with CDCR, which a lot of times don't. Yeah, exactly. And that's my employer, by the way.
yeah. Yeah. So that's one possibility. And the fact that Bakersfield College is interested, I think, again, is just indicative of that partnership that we've had with them. But it's an alternative for some of our youth. And I think that too can be a pipeline, if you will, to the wonderful industrial parks amenity and training center, and finding some way to kind of prep our students to go from here to there, maybe find some future jobs over there. I mean, that's just a concept, but it's something definitely worth exploring further as we continue to move forward. Implement AB 1000, the environmental justice. There's more work to come of that. As you know, we received a 45-page letter from the Center of Poverty, Race, and I can't think. Environment. Thank you, Mayor. With a number of their concerns. So we're pumping the brakes and working with our city attorney's office and preparing a response to the group. Discuss funding options to invest in city infrastructure, parks, sewer, water. Again, we're continuing to grow, but we are over 100-year-old city. And so we do have aging infrastructure. So I think it's important for us to address that in terms of a capital replacement program. And so that's something we should continue to have further discussions and come up with a master plan for that. Explore water supply options. We just briefly discussed the importance of having a long-term sustainable water supply. I just spoke to the replace aging infrastructure. Build regional transportation projects to address traffic congestion, safety issues. This would be an example, would be the cargo study, of which the city of Shafter is a partner with Kerncog, in which Kerncog is leading that effort, Caltrans, City of Bakersfield, and Kern County. And I think there'll be more information coming to you on that. As you know, we presented to you the phase 1 of that work, and they went out and did a RFP for phase 2, which they would be, I believe, commencing that work here in the very near future. So ongoing discussions about that. Explore alternative service delivery options for transit. as you may have heard from not only present staff, but staff in the past. There's a lot of reporting and monitoring that takes place with having and operating our own dial ride. And so there might be an opportunity to either consolidate with the county or another neighboring city, or just look at how we might be able to find an alternative service delivery model. We're not saying to get rid of it. We're just saying to find a way that we might be able to minimize some of that staff time that requires us to do the monitoring and reporting for it. Organizational assessment. As we continue to grow as a city, so too we will need to grow as an organization. A best practice for organizations in both public and private is, evaluating your current organizational structure, making sure that you not only have the current capacity, but you have the right positions to meet that service demand. And so doing an organizational assessment is a tool for policy and administration to make those type of recommendations and decisions. An IT strategic plan, I think that speaks for itself. Exploring, seeking operators for city-owned rail yard and fiber optic network. Obviously, that's something that's been discussed in the past. It's a carryover item. And as we previously shared with council, we will be bringing more information to you as part either in the next couple months or as part of the budget process. Develop public safety policies and implement. I'm going to defer to Chief Zimmerman to talk a little bit more about this in a little bit more detail, simply because it's not necessarily operational changes that we want to make, but more so because it's driven by legislation that is changing the manner in which we operate as law enforcement. Chief.
Honorable Mayor, members of the council, we thought it would be important to put this into the future concept here, because we need to start the process of researching that development into public safety practices directly related to body-worn cameras and transparency. Mostly because it's no secret that in Sacramento, there's a trend towards police reform. We've already talked a little bit about AB 109 and a few of the other implementations over the last decade that have affected law enforcement, have affected communities directly. So what we hope to do in this respect is hope to be ready and expect to be prepared for the mechanics of those changes. So that's all you see here. So when we're talking body-worn cameras and the implementation and the research into it, it's really in the hope that we can get in front of this narrative. There's only a couple of states currently that have mandated the use of all of their police officers using body-worn cameras, but other states are definitely looking into it. So we're just gonna try to get ahead of it, do the proper research, and as far as policies and procedures go, we have a pretty good handle on that right now. So, in the next couple of years, you can probably expect to see body-worn cameras or a request for them. It's really, the cost is not the equipment. The cost is for storage. We had over 23,000 interactions last year of one sort or another. Every one of those, or most every one of those interactions are going to have to be recorded and stored. And then really the staffing component is even larger. So not just the equipment, not just the storage, but you have to have the staff that are available to go through when there are public information requests, to go through those documents, because it basically becomes a record. We have to go through those records and only release what's legally applicable. And that takes time and energy. So when we're talking about some of these concepts, it's really in that there's many layers to it. So we're on the front end of looking, and you'll be the first to know when we discover what those layers are going to look like.
I'm actually glad you're looking at that, Chief, already. I know it's something that it's coming our way. I mean, unfortunately, it's already on my end. It's already here. 5 prisons in the valley just got ordered by a federal judge to wear body-worn cameras, and my prison is one of them.
Wow.
So every single officer, you're talking about 900 plus officers having to wear body-worn cameras, including the supervisors. So when we're talking, how many staff members? Yours?
Yeah. 35.
compared to 900 plus with us, and that's 5 prisons in the valley that we're going to be ordered by a federal judge.
Wow.
That we're having to do that. So it's something that's coming, and it's coming for all law enforcement. There's a good and a bad in everything.
Mhm.
There's a good and a bad in everything. It'll cut down on a lot of false allegations and complaints as well. It's a good thing. But I mean, I'm on both sides of the spectrum. I can see the good and the bad, unfortunately. You know, but it's coming, it's a trend, and it's not going anywhere. It's actually gonna get worse.
Thank you, Chief. The next is conducting a utility fee study, revamping our purchase card, restoration and library services. We cover that in terms of our council ad hoc committee and community work group. Conduct a citywide classifications and compensation study. And then lastly, update our human resource policies and procedures with best practices. As you probably know, some cities you've heard or organizations may have like a zero tolerance for hostile work environment, sexual harassment, drug use. So that's an example of what we're talking about when we talk about updating some of our HR policies and procedures.
The purchase card revamp, is that just American Express or Visa cards
Yeah.
for? Okay.
Are the way we issue them, what we use them for. So, yeah. And Mayor and Council, that is and what you see here, just one disclaimer, it's not all encompassing. So this is what we've come up with. I'm sure when we go into the next workshop, you'll have some as well. But we wanted to share with you what we see from our perspective. And then Mayor and Council is the next steps. As I said, one of the desired outcomes was for us to schedule a second workshop that will hopefully entail with your consensus to prepare for the development of an organizational mission and vision and values. And then development of strategic goals and also review of city council norms. And Mayor and Council, that concludes our presentation. And if you have any questions on any of the items we've presented, myself and the team are available for you.
I think we had opportunity to ask as we went along, but is there anything else that anyone has?
Well, we've got an hour and 40 minutes.
No, we
before
don't,
we're able to be
because I had
released.
the hammer.
And, and Paul says he doesn't have to be anywhere for quite some time, so.
No. Okay, are you finished too?
Yeah, if you wanted, in terms of the second workshop, I can have the city clerk send out some proposed dates, and then you can respond. And so, or we can just bring it back.
Yeah, we don't have a set time schedule for any of it. It's just that because with the budget coming in, do we still need to get it in the middle there? Or?
Ideally, we want to identify those strategic goals and
Okay.
priorities so that if there are any future CIP projects like the swimming pool or other like that, we would include in the budget.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, so we should. All right, Yasmin will get back to us then.
Yes.
All right. Any
I
other-
just wanted to know that you were open to us moving forward and scheduling that second workshop.
Any other comments? Okay, we've concluded the management reports and we can use a motion to adjourn.
Make a motion to adjourn.
I'll second it.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to adjourn. All those in favor say aye. Aye, opposed, no.
Aye.
We are adjourned.
Aye.